What's up, everyone? We're back for another episode of Locked On Bucks, and we're going to continue working through the mailbag. We have plenty of MarJon Beauchamp questions, which is not going to surprise anyone. Lineup questions. Brook Lopez, what does the future look like for the Bucks at the center position? And what the heck is going on with Jordan Nwora? Let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show a few days a week. Let's say minimum 3 days a week through August, then back to 5 days a week in September. You can also find my work over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com, longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, for today's episode that is brought to you by the delicious Built Bar. More on that a little bit later on in the podcast. I love Built Bar. There's no doubt about that. All right. Continuing questions, Frank. This one comes from Nishan Abraham, who, by the way, has been sending questions through for a long time, so we absolutely appreciate that. This is a part of a few questions around MarJon Beauchamp. So Danny Schmitz was involved in here. Of course, we love Danny on this podcast as well, and Virgo Kid. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to bust a bit of a myth here, Frank, in my opinion. Nishan asks, will Bud break his streak of only trusting veterans? This is a very popular take. You hear it a lot, whether it's on Twitter, certainly in the YouTube comments. I think it's a myth. I think the Bucks have just had no good young players. They haven't.
His only first round pick, he played a bunch, right? Dante DiVincenzo. It's kind of wild just to think how long Bud has been here, and to think that this is only his second first round pick is kind of funny.
I think that's the point. So Dante, obviously in his first season, played a lot, but was injured. I think he played around 27 games, something around there. But he was playing legitimate minutes on a Bucks team that was good for the first time in a long time. And then other than that, you shuffle through the names. I mean, Sam Merrill's in there, but I don't think anyone was banging down the door for him to play. I know there was the Mamadi Diakite hive that was there for a while, but that was ridiculous. So the only other player he's had is Jordan Nwora. And I would heavily push back that Nwora hasn't had opportunities. Last year, he played over 1,200 minutes, particularly earlier in the season. He was getting real rotation stuff. He appeared in over 60 games. So, yeah, it's just not a concern for me that Bud would have some hesitance to playing Beauchamp because he's young. I don't really agree with that.
Yeah, and it should be noted as well, his first year was DJ Wilson's second year.
Right.
Christian Wood was on the roster as well. So I think some of that residual kind of like, why doesn't Bud play the young guys thing was also kind of due to some of those feelings back then that, he didn't really play those guys. And, I think obviously DJ's the fact that he's, flamed out, since then, right? It's not like he's gone someplace else and shown that the Bucks were wrong. Christian Wood obviously has shown way more, but it also took him, he went to New Orleans, basically didn't play, then got waived, then went to Detroit, eventually kind of showed out a bit for a bad Pistons team, and then they didn't pay him. And he ends up in Houston, puts up numbers, and obviously gets traded again. So as much as I was an unabashed Christian Wood fan, and yes, the self-anointed prime minister of the Woodlands, am I bitter that the Bucks didn't invest heavily in Christian Wood minutes? I mean, the irony is that he basically patterned his game after Giannis, and he's basically, kind of like homeless man's Giannis with, I don't know, complete derelict defense version of Giannis, I guess. Good offensive player. It's like, did he have like a really long-term role? Like, not really, right? I mean, Bobby Portis is basically like kind of the good version probably of what Christian Wood could have been here in Milwaukee. So yeah, but I agree. I mean, I think I am really curious to see what MarJon Beauchamp brings to this team and what kind of opportunities he's afforded. I think two injuries, I think, will probably give him much more of an opening than he might have otherwise had. One being obviously the fact that you used your mid-level exception on a guy in Joe Ingles that is going to miss half the season, probably at least. Basically gives MarJon more of a runway for minutes that might dry up once Joe Ingles presumably comes back, and they'll, you have to think they're obviously going to want to see what they can get from Joe and try to work him into the rotation, whether he comes back. I know he's targeting December. I feel like January is probably the more optimistic, more realistic view. But then the other one being Chris Middleton, right? I mean, if Chris is not really playing at all in camp and in preseason, and maybe he misses the start of the regular season recovering from this wrist surgery, then that's a huge opportunity for MarJon Beauchamp, because we saw in the playoffs how thin the Bucks were on the wing, and guess what? The only guy they really added was Joe Ingles, who's got a torn ACL. So I think we'll see probably a lot of him in the preseason, and it's a real good opportunity for him to kind of get acclimated and get his feet wet. And I think what we saw with Dante was that, if you kind of are an active defender and you work hard, Bud will try to manufacture some looks for you. And I think so many of the other guys that we've seen since then, again, as you said, they were, late second round picks. A lot of them, Sam Merrill, Mamu, and Jordan Nwora, guys that were very offense first, and obviously just could not impact the game defensively, even though, Mamu, I think, not for a lack of effort. Really, Diakite was like the one guy who, theoretically was kind of a more defensive guy. But, again, just really limited, and, didn't really have like kind of that ideal bulk. And that's why obviously Mamadi hasn't really caught on anywhere either. So yeah, I think he's definitely, I think the most interesting guy, probably the most uncertain guy to watch in the preseason, just because we don't really know what he's going to be able to do. And I thought obviously the shooting in Vegas was really encouraging. That is kind of the big swing skill for him. I think the other parts of his game I thought were kind of underwhelming. But as we said, he was kind of just parked in the corner most of the time, kind of playing like he'll probably have to play when he's playing with the Bucks' best players. And certainly he may be able to get freed up for cuts and kind of garbage stuff a little more easily when he's on the floor with Chris and Giannis and Drew Holiday than he is playing where he's one of the best players on a summer league team. So we'll kind of see what he can bring, but I think if he can play defense well and make the odd jump shot, he'll get a chance. And obviously just cross your fingers that he's able to, maybe shoot better than certainly his projection last year would have suggested. Hopefully if he shoots it like he did in Vegas, then he'll definitely get a chance. But to me, I'm not really worried about Bud keeping MarJon down. Like, I don't foresee a scenario where MarJon's like really ready to be a rotation guy, and Bud is preventing him from getting any minutes. I think he'll get some looks, and it's mostly going to come down to whether or not he's ready to kind of take advantage of them.
Because of that need and the question marks, certainly Joe Ingles, I do feel that he'll get opportunities early in the season at least, and whether he gets to 1,200 minutes like Jordan Nwora did, I mean, he'll probably have to produce and be proving himself to be at least a semi-reliable defensive player, I think, for the most part, and probably knock down open threes. But yeah, I can see him definitely getting opportunities. Danny Schmitz asked about whether he could start at the 2. I think, honestly, my feeling is if he's starting at the 2 in crunch time, end of the season, he's either just been absolutely ridiculous or there's bigger concerns for the Bucks from a health perspective. So I don't really see that, but we've spoken a lot about the 5th starter, if you want to call it that. And Virgo Kid asked whether he could have a Brogdon-like rookie season impact. When I looked back at the roster for the Brogdon season, there was a lot of guys that were playing a lot that are no longer in the league. That's all I'll say. So, do I think that he's going to have that responsibility? Probably not. That doesn't mean that he can't be, like a DiVincenzo impactful player, I would say, as a rookie, perhaps more than a Malcolm Brogdon. And Brogdon we spoke about on the last podcast as well. All right, we've got plenty more questions to get to. There's a particular lineup that a listener suggests in closing lineup. So I want to throw that at you, Frank, after I throw at you. Well, I would never throw Built Bar at you, though, actually. I would not throw Built Bar at you because I would just eat it.
Gently lob it, maybe. Yeah.
If you could get, if you, I'm not going to go there, but yes, I would share Built Bar with you, but not many other people. And let me introduce you to your new favorite, Frank, and all the listeners: cookie dough chunk puffs. They are light and chewy. They have real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs, only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein. Run to built.com. Don't worry about walking to built.com. Run to built.com right now to snag an entire box for you and the family because they're not going to last long. Frank in the past has lamented the fact that they have these brilliant flavors. Actually, Frank's wife, I believe it was, has lamented the fact that these flavors just don't last long. They're so popular, they run out of stock and then they move on to the next genius creation. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your order. Use promo code Locked On 15, it is, by the way. This has changed. Locked On 15 to get 15% off your order at built.com. All right, everyone's interested in closing lineups, Frank. It's a very popular conversation we have. This one came in from Ian Lambert. He says Drew Holiday, Pat Connaughton, Chris Middleton, Wesley Matthews, Giannis closing lineup. Now, he suggested that we didn't see much of this last season, and I thought that's interesting because that lineup does make a lot of sense on paper. So I went to our friends over at cleaningtheglass.com. In the regular season, 17 possessions only. And then in the postseason, they never really played because Chris did not last long. So really an untried lineup that on paper makes a hell of a lot of sense. Keeping in mind that there could be, by the end of the season, 2 potential wild cards that could mix and match, Joe Ingles being one of those, and Beauchamp, who we just spoke about, could be the other. But when you look at all those names, and then you add in Ingles and Beauchamp, and then, of course, you have Portis and Brook, it's like, okay, it does feel like if everyone's healthy, and in a best-case scenario, it does feel like there's a few more options than potentially there were by Game 7 of the series against the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what the opponent lineup is. I think what PJ gave you that was so unique was you could play this quote unquote small lineup, and PJ can defend a wing, right? Like against Atlanta, wasn't he guarding Bogdan Bogdanovic? By the way, in our last pod, I accidentally said Bogdan Bogdanovic when I was trying to say Bojan Bogdanovic, the deal he signed with the Jazz. Mea culpa.
Everyone, by the way, everyone was pissed about it.
Yeah, we literally recorded that pod 10 minutes ago, so I'm like, in almost real time correcting myself here, but you guys won't see it for a little bit. Yeah, I mean, he can defend, right? I mean, like he guarded Chris Paul at times. He was guarding Devin Booker. I think he was the man. I think he was defending Devin Booker on the steal and alley-oop play in Game 5 of that series. But the flip side was he could also switch onto a big guy, and he's, PJ just is that strong physique, and he's really good at boxing out. And it kind of allowed you to play big and physical while also playing small, right? And that is he's just a weirdo in that regard, in a good way. And so I think the problem with the lineup kind of that you mentioned, I think if you're playing against a team that is going very small, I think it would have obvious appeals because you essentially have 4 wings that are fairly switchable amongst each other defensively, and then obviously Giannis you can switch onto whoever as well. Again, Giannis and switches I don't think is I'm always kind of like I'm a little hesitant to say that like, oh, just switch everything when Giannis is at center, because I think there are times where you kind of let him play center field. I mean, the block on DeAndre Ayton, he was not switched, right? But because he's so dynamic, he was essentially able to kind of felt like he had switched a little bit onto Devin Booker, but he was able to again play that kind of center field role where he kind of comes up a little bit and then can still cover the backline alley-oop. So I think there's lineups certainly for an opponent that could work. But I think the flip side is that also leaves you fairly small. So I think, again, if you're pulling that lineup against an opponent that has some size, then I think it could hurt you on the glass. And again, maybe doesn't kind of give you the, quite the the death lineup effect that maybe you're hoping for. But certainly if you're, asking me who are guys that should be playing, big minutes in playoff games, I'm not going to argue with any of those guys, right? I mean, basically last year, if you were going to come up with your kind of top 7 or 8 guys, it would essentially be that group plus Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, right? That's probably your top 7. And then obviously there was always the question about, who's the other guard that you play. And, I don't want to rehash the George Hill, Javon Carter discussion right now, but yeah, is there, a role that group can play? I think so. But I think I just want to underscore as well, part of the Bucks problem since losing PJ is that they don't have any single lineup that is as versatile to me and can play stylistically as versatile, in the same versatile way as what they had when they had PJ. And so they have to be a little bit more, basically forces Bud to be a little bit more tactical with his lineups. And you can't just say like, here's our best 5, you guys deal with that, which, again, I think the Bucks are always a team that likes to sort of take that mindset of like, we're going to focus on ourselves and not have to do the thing where you kind of match your guys against their guys. But, I think they're in a little bit different spot now because they have a little bit more, when you talk about like guys like Grayson, and if Grayson Allen, obviously you would hope could be in your top 7 or 8 too, that, you have to kind of do a little bit more of that offense defense trade-off than you might otherwise have to.
What are the Bucks going to do at the center position moving forward? In the last podcast, we discussed potential extension options for Chris Milton. Perhaps, maybe not so much from a financial point of view, but just in terms of transition, the role that Brook Lopez has had with this team, clearly the importance he's had for the defensive side of the ball, and at times, clearly, the talents that they've been able to tap into at times on offense as well. People are curious about what's going to happen here. So Jordan asks, should the Bucks have looked for a rookie big man instead of Serge, given the expected limited role that Serge Ibaka is going to play anyway? Then Riffraff, which perfectly describes me, I should say.
Don't say our listeners.
Me.
Don't say our listeners. Yeah.
Perfectly describes me, but I didn't ask this question. But it's who should the Bucks be looking at as a replacement, which is potentially a more difficult question to answer. But just in general, to me, it does feel like, again, we're heading for this really interesting offseason next year. We'll have another season of Brook Lopez post-back surgery. So he looked pretty good when he came back. But if he's been remarkably reliable now for a number of years, certainly since coming to the Bucks before this injury. So if he has a year where he's starting to break down a little bit, okay, maybe that speeds up the process in terms of moving on and maybe shuts the door on any type of, money, Bobby Portis extension, whatever the money would be. I'm not sure. He's obviously a little bit older. Just with Serge Ibaka, for me, I was really down on the potential big man that they could have drafted in, what was his name? Walker Kessler, or Kessler Walker.
The Goober?
Yeah, well, that's what I didn't know what that was, but yes, that's may have been referenced. I was out on that.
I referred to him as a goober because his college headshot made him look like a goober.
Yes.
Just Google it. Google the goober. Sorry, Walker. He got a better haircut. He got a better haircut by draft time, but his auburn haircut just kind of his chin kind of juts out a little bit. Just looks like a goober. But anyway,
nice. Big 7-foot white guy. Anyway. So I was out on that selection. I didn't want to go down that path. I didn't see much value in using your first round pick on a center. So I probably wouldn't have gone down the rookie path personally. I like what they got in MarJon Beauchamp. Feels certainly more versatile for the modern game. But that being said, I understand that Serge Ibaka at this point in time looks like he won't play a major role. But they got Serge Ibaka last year because it felt, certainly to me, I assume, because they wanted the Brook Lopez insurance. John Horst has kind of mentioned that. And to me, it probably feels like it again. Maybe they do want to have that veteran there, so they're not shuffling through DeMarcus Cousins, Greg Monroe, these guys looking for anyone that can eat minutes. So it kind of makes sense to me, but there's no doubt the clock will be ticking on a decision here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, I think you could argue, Brook is the first big domino, right? Just given his age.
Yeah.
When you think about the core of this team, the guy that is, the first guy that you would expect to get to the point where, he maybe just isn't a starter, or even next year, we'll see what kind of minutes he plays, right? Like, do his minutes get reduced to 20 minutes a game next year, right? Rather than being a 25 to 29-minute guy or whatever he's been in the past. So, I mean, I think there's a few things we can probably, safely assume. One, you just gave Bobby Portis 49 million bucks over the next 4 years, including a player option. And, if you think his best position is power forward, well, then he's playing behind the best player in the world. So that doesn't necessarily leave a lot of minutes. So the obvious answer would be, well, they're expecting him to play a lot of center, right? And so I think, I think the silver lining of last year was we saw Bobby could be very good as a regular season innings eater, and a guy that paired really well with Giannis. They were, a big positive with Giannis and Bobby together. And probably the most surprising to me was I was looking on Cleaning the Glass. I was worried, like, oh man, like Bobby without Giannis or Brook, right? That's got to be like just where the Bucks get killed, because defensively, obviously, Bobby's not a protector anywhere close to what those guys are. And you really have to kind of just play him a little more aggressively. And, how would you figure that out? But when I was looking at it earlier, I think they were plus 1.6 points per 100 or something with Bobby on the floor and no Brook or Giannis, I believe, which kind of surprised me. Because if you can basically kind of survive in those scenarios and then really flourish when Bobby's playing with Giannis, and also when he's able to kind of lean on Brook and his rim protection, then I think that kind of underscores why Bobby is obviously a valuable player to them, and why you don't worry so much about leaning on him to take some of Brook's minutes, or give Brook more nights off, or if Brook again gets hurt, hopefully not for an extended period, but that you can lean on Bobby to kind of just get you through stretches of the regular season where maybe you're not at full strength. So I think that's part of it, right? You don't give Bobby that money unless you think he can play a lot of those center minutes. But I think it's an interesting question. It's like, I mean, well, but are you really like saying that Bobby's just going to be your starting center, and you're just going to get some random backup dude to replace Brook eventually? Kind of essentially replace some of Brook's minutes. And here's the problem. I mean, the hard part is you can't just draft another 7-footer and expect him to become Brook Lopez, right? I mean, his intelligence and his physical tools and just what he's able to do defensively for this team that we've seen over the last 4 years, his offensive skill set, which again, maybe we obviously have not seen as much as certainly he was able to show off when he was in Brooklyn. But, the skill set he has offensively, inside and honestly to a lesser extent probably outside, has been really valuable, at various points. I mean, the Atlanta series maybe being kind of the prime example of that. So I think the hard part is you don't just take a second round flyer on a guy and say, oh, that's our Brook Lopez replacement, right? Like, you're just not going to do that. And we kind of got spoiled getting Brook as a biennial exception guy. And so I think it's a really
Lakers.
tough. Yeah, thanks, Lakers. So I think it's a really tough thing to kind of figure out. I think most likely the Bucks are just going to have to figure out how they evolve their defense over the next couple of years, to be a team that is less of a Brook Lopez anchored drop, zone drop defensive type of team, just because I don't think you can replace Brook Lopez like that. That said, I mean, I still think, as long as Brook is, he looked healthy coming back from the injury last year. Hopefully that's a good harbinger for this season, that he's able to get through this season healthy and productive. So my hope is that it's kind of a, slow decline. And I think, again, just from the MO of this team, we know what Brook means to Giannis, and we know how much obviously Bud and the rest of this team loves Brook. I mean, the locker room presence, I don't think probably gets talked about enough, like the way he fits in culturally with what the Bucks do. I mean, just one of the best dudes you're going to find. So I think he'll be back after next season again, assuming he's reasonably healthy. I think he just probably comes back for, a lower contract number, and maybe they give him like a 1+1 sort of as like a, hey, we're not just going to, make you go year by year. We'll give you a little bit of kind of the, the John Horst 1+1 player option special, but maybe just at a lower number and just sort of take care of him that way. And then I think obviously the question is, does he become a bench guy at some point after next season? So I think they're probably going to try to keep him around.
His brother's absolutely settled into the bench life, so maybe. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but when you mentioned bench life, I just imagined Robin Lopez literally just sitting on the floor for a whole season for the Orlando Magic. It's just very bizarre to me.
He just lays on the floor. He doesn't even need a bench spot, Gotta keep that back. Gotta keep that back limbered up. So anyway, so long story short, I think Brook will be with the Bucks beyond next season. Mm-hmm. I think the hard part is just figuring out what that transition looks like, and would not shock me at all if Bobby eventually were to start in Brook's place. Maybe Brook comes off the bench, or the other way is you just play Brook way fewer minutes, and you're kind of having him more as a ceremonial starter, and you're playing Bobby more minutes every night and kind of peeling Brook's role back a little bit.
Again, and we mentioned Chris Middleton on the last podcast, and as we've said, difficult decisions obviously to come, particularly if for whatever reason there are other teams that are going to be throwing money at these guys. Who knows? It'll depend on probably the way they play this season and what they want to have moving forward. But clearly we've seen over the last few years, players have been willing to stay in Milwaukee for friendly deals, shall we say. But in terms of guys that I think have been underappreciated for the role they've played, Brook Lopez is potentially at the top of the list. And as you pointed to, really some pretty good fortune that Brook Lopez ended up in Milwaukee. And I just finished reading the Mid-Range Theory, a book from Seth Partnow, and there was some really good Brook Lopez stuff at the start of that book in terms of how he came to Milwaukee, why they valued what he could bring to the team. If you haven't read the book, you should certainly do so. But again, a guy that's been maligned at times. I've never understood why, but has been a huge part of what the Bucks have been doing. I think it will be interesting to see when you talk about Bobby Portis potentially starting. If you think back to previous seasons prior to the back surgery, Brook Lopez he never got rested. When all the starters didn't play, Brook was the one random guy that was as like Bud said, sorry, man, you're playing. And he would be starting with the end of the bench guys. I think that'll change this year. It wouldn't surprise me anyway if they manage him a little bit differently to what they have in the past, particularly coming off the back surgery. But that'll be interesting to see. One more before we wrap up this one. Jordan Nwora, Sal Cully, and also Jordan. And I'll paraphrase this, but basically, what's going on with Jordan Nwora? That's the general question.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we talked about MarJon Beauchamp earlier in in our previous pod, and kind of why we'd expect him to at least get a chance in training camp with Joe Ingles out for the first significant portion of the season, and Chris coming back from the wrist surgery. I mean, I'm also partly factoring the fact that I feel like it's probably more likely than not that Jordan does not come back this season. But it's kind of an awkward spot right now because they do have a roster spot, and they've put the qualifying offer out to him, which in theory he could take, but it's basically essentially just a minimum contract basically for this coming season. So not really a lot of pressure for him to take that, right? Because it's like, okay, I assume he could probably get a minimum somewhere regardless. So and again, like you reach a point in the season where teams can pull that typically if they really don't want a guy back, and we have not heard that has happened. So so it seems like I don't know, it feels kind of like they're it's like a relationship where kind of like each party's hoping the other like breaks up with them. And it's part of me is like wondering, like, would John Horst be happy on some level if someone gave Jordan $4 million a year so that he could say, oh yeah, that would be $16 million a year in luxury tax on the margin for us. So we just can't do it. Sorry, Jordan. Good luck to wherever you're going. But instead, they're kind of just in this, awkward waiting game of not knowing kind of what comes next. So, so I'm not sure. I mean, I think we've said in the past. I mean, we think the Bucks are a team that we would expect would like to probably have an open roster spot going into the regular season. Again, if you need to sign somebody, injury replacement. We saw it last year with Boogie. Were able to bring him on. Again, you actually have Serge Ibaka as your best backup center this year, so you wouldn't be in that same spot from like a big man perspective. They released Yorgos Kalaitzakis last year. We're able to bring on Wes. I don't know that there's the same type of guy, the same type of guy on the roster this year that you could just be like, oh, well, screw that guy, like cut him and bring on this veteran who can actually help us. So, having that open roster spot does give you some of that flexibility. So, could you get him and then give him away at the trade deadline if you wanted to, again, sort of reduce your cap exposure going into because again, the tax is only based on kind of the team you have at the end of the regular season. Yeah, you could do that, but I don't know. So I would say I'm probably like 65-35 that he doesn't come back, but everybody else has come back, so maybe Jordan comes back as well. I felt kind of bad for him seeing like pictures of him with other guys on the team, and it's like everybody else has been re-signed, and Jordan's still kind of out there flapping in the wind, trying to figure out what comes next. But I don't know. I mean, I think there's an NBA player there somewhere, right? But I think this is one of the challenges with second round picks is so often these guys who figure it out, it takes them 2-3 stops before they actually figure out how exactly they fit into an NBA role and how they, become valuable role players. And I think Jordan's obviously shown flashes early last season, obviously some really encouraging moments, including in that Nets game to open the season. But, I think just his defensive limitations always sort of put a ceiling on kind of how valuable he can be to a team that has championship aspirations. So part of me kind of feels like it would be fun to see him just go to a kind of a bad team that maybe, has some room to give him 20 minutes a night without the pressure of, being a title favorite. But again, I don't know. I think, certainly in terms of his ultimate development, probably good that he's in this type of situation, having to, really kind of be a guy that has to play both ways in order to get minutes. But, I would say probably for him, and, I think if he does have a long-term NBA future, probably would be surprising to me if that ultimately came in Milwaukee, especially given the fact that they just drafted a guy in MarJon Beauchamp who, positionally kind of fits in a similar spot.
The Bucks are working on the MarJons, and they've chosen Beauchamp over Jordan Nwora. Okay, that's probably a good way to end this. Although I will say, you mentioned Serge Ibaka in that 14th spot last year coming into the season. That's what we were asking about the center position for obvious reasons. It looked like a big hole, particularly, Brook went down after one game. I think just looking at it this year, probably the question for me is the point guard spot because obviously Drew's there, and we know they've got a bunch of guys that can handle the ball. It's not like they lack for ball handling, but that backup point guard spot, there has to be a question on George Hill. I know he, again, talk about maligned players. He's a maligned player with Bucks fans right now. But does he come back healthy, or is, maybe not? Yeah, so that's a question there. And that's probably why I just think that, they'll enter the season with an open roster spot. And as far as Jordan Nwora is concerned, well, I mean, we're not that far from the season. I mean, eventually there'll have to be a decision for him to play somewhere. And if it's not the NBA, is it the G League? Is it overseas? Not sure. But I agree. I mean, he's shown stuff that, he can play. It's just very difficult on a contender that have now added multiple guys that play the similar positions that he did. So, yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Nwora.
Yeah, and I think that I didn't really fully answer the question before, but talking about the big man spot, Serge gives them kind of that insurance policy. I would have preferred if they could have given that spot basically to a younger player, who could have again, maybe he has, a guy that maybe has some upside to develop into something different. And again, would that guy have been better than Serge Ibaka this year? Maybe not. But we know that Serge Ibaka is probably not having some career renaissance, right? We know Serge Ibaka is not the Brook Lopez replacement, even though he's officially officially younger than Brook Lopez. So I think that's kind of the hard part is, again, like, can you find some guy on the margins? I think oftentimes even in the second round, you can find value, I think, at the center spot because it has become such a commoditized position and such a marginalized position in many ways. But I think that's obviously something that Bucks are probably going to need to take some shots at it, even if realistically you're probably not going to just magically find your next Brook Lopez there. So so we'll kind of have to see what happens. But like when the Raptors drafted like Christian Koloko, right, in the second round from Arizona, is Christian Koloko a future NBA starter? Probably not, right? I mean, just based on where he was drafted and his kind of profile, probably not. But maybe, right? And you're not using a first round pick on the guy, so it's a little bit less of a risk than spending your first round pick in 4 years on him. So I think it'll just be interesting to see just sort of how the Bucks kind of manage that. And again, at some point they will have to confront that. And I think the answer isn't purely just, well, just play Bobby Portis and Giannis more, because at some point, we saw last year, you need at least 3 legit big guys on your roster. And hopefully Brook can be that guy for maybe 2 more years, 3 more years. I don't know. Maybe we'll have the PJ Tucker aging curve, but fingers crossed. But
8 more years.
Yeah. But it's probably we're being a bit optimistic and maybe a little overly nostalgic if we expect Brook to just become a 40-year-old starting center in Milwaukee at some point.
I know it's like a little bit boring, perhaps, but I like to be relatively conservative with my predictions, particularly really looking ahead into the future. So I'd like to make a prediction right now. At the end of next season, Brook Lopez signs a 4-year extension, very reasonable money though, with the Bucks. And then after that, the Philadelphia 76ers give him $15 million a year to take him through to the age of 41. Still searching for their title. They think Brook Lopez could be the key 12 years after he led the Bucks to a historic title against Phoenix. That's my prediction. The Sixers. We didn't even speak about the Sixers, but what a funny franchise. Now they're trying to get Kevin Durant. Anyway, I'm sure we can talk about that at some other point. So let's wrap it up. More questions that are still there. They'll keep coming through, I'm sure. So we'll get to those over the next few weeks. We've got plenty of time, let's be honest. Frank, this is 2 episodes, over an hour of podcasting. Nearing midnight for you, or is it beyond midnight? Nearing midnight for you.
Well, it's 11:17. So
go watch some TV or something.
It's Thursday night. I just got to get through tomorrow. I'm driving to Houston tomorrow, so I will have been in Houston for the weekend by the time this airs. So I'll kind of put my ear to the ground, see how things are going in Rockets land.
Yes,
since my wife is a Rockets fan. But yeah, good time still in Milwaukee, man. I'm still just at ease. Bucks NBA title, a little over 12 months in the rearview mirror, but man, still feels good. Winning a championship, underrated in my book as a fan. Better than I expected. 5 stars, thumbs up.
Yeah, no question. And one final thought. We spoke about the purple jerseys in the last podcast, but for all those people that had dreams of the Bucks winning a title in a purple jersey, the time is now. For those that hung on to that dream, this is your year. We'll see how they go. Frank and myself, leave it there. Speak to you guys next time.